A man found an orange cat being bullied by stray dogs. What the cat did next moved the whole town to tears. The fluorescent lights of the Miller and Sons manufacturing plant hummed a monotonous tune, a soundtrack to Daniel Mallory's increasingly solitary life. At 58, Daniel was a man of routine, a creature of habit, clinging to the familiar in a world that had changed too much, too fast. He worked the late shift, 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., assembling small engine components, a job he'd held for over 30 years, ever since the plant had been the beating heart of Oak Haven, Ohio. Oak Haven, however, was no longer the thriving industrial town it once was. The mill had closed a decade ago, taking with it hundreds of jobs and a sense of collective purpose. The younger generation had mostly moved away, seeking opportunities in brighter, more prosperous places. Oak Haven felt like a town holding its breath, waiting for a change that might never come. Daniel's own life mirrored the town's decline. His wife, Martha, had passed away 5 years earlier, succumbing to a swift and brutal illness that had left him reeling. They'd never had children, a quiet sorrow they'd learned to live with, but now, in the echoing silence of their small bungalow, the absence of family felt like a physical weight. His days were largely the same. He woke late, ate a simple breakfast, tended to his small garden, Martha's roses, stubbornly refusing to give up the ghost, and then prepared for work. He rarely saw his neighbors, a mix of elderly retirees and younger families struggling to make ends meet. He'd offer a polite nod, a brief wave, but conversations were rare. The factory, too, had changed. It was a skeleton crew now, a fraction of the workforce it once boasted. The younger workers, mostly temporary hires, kept to themselves, their earbuds blasting music he couldn't understand, their conversations filled with references he couldn't grasp. He felt like a relic, a leftover from a bygone era. He found solace in the work itself, the repetitive motions, the familiar feel of the tools in his hands, the small sense of accomplishment that came with completing each task. It was a distraction, a way to fill the hours, to keep the loneliness at bay. As he walked to his locker at the end of his shift, the usual weariness settled upon him. The walk home was about a mile, a route he usually took along Main Street, past the darkened storefronts and the flickering streetlights. Tonight, however, he decided to take a shortcut, a narrow alleyway that cut behind the old mill, a path he hadn't used in years. It was a decision that would change his life forever. The alleyway was dark, a narrow canyon between the looming brick walls of the abandoned mill and a row of dilapidated warehouses. The air was thick with the smell of damp concrete, rusting metal, and something else, something feral and unsettling. Moonlight barely penetrated the gloom, casting long, distorted shadows that danced with the swaying branches of a lone, scraggly tree. Daniel felt a prickle of unease, a sense of being watched. He quickened his pace, his hand instinctively reaching for the small can of pepper spray he carried in his pocket, a precaution Martha had insisted upon years ago. He'd never used it, never even thought he'd need to. But tonight, the darkness felt oppressive, the silence unnervingly heavy. He was halfway through the alley when he heard it, a low, guttural growl, followed by a sharp, terrified yowl. He stopped, his heart pounding in his chest. The sounds were coming from up ahead, from a shadowed recess beneath a loading dock. He hesitated. It was none of his business. He should just keep walking, get home, lock the door, forget he'd heard anything. It was probably just a couple of stray dogs fighting over scraps. It was the way of things, the harsh reality of life on the streets. But then he heard another sound, a small, desperate whimper, a sound that pierced through the darkness and tugged at something deep within him. It was the sound of fear, of pain, of helplessness. He couldn't ignore it. He took a deep breath, gripped the pepper spray, and cautiously moved forward, his eyes straining to penetrate the gloom. As he approached the loading dock, the scene slowly came into focus. 3 large dogs, their breeds a mix of shadows and menace, were circling a small, huddled figure. Their growls were low and menacing, their teeth bared in savage snarls. The figure, a cat, an orange tabby, was backed against the wall, its fur bristling, its body trembling. It was clearly injured, its movements slow and labored, but it stood its ground, defiantly facing its attackers. And then Daniel saw it, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement beneath a loose piece of plywood leaning against the wall. A kitten, its eyes wide with terror, hidden in the shadows, protected by the battered, wounded body of the orange cat. Daniel didn't hesitate. He roared, a primal sound that surprised even himself, and charged forward, waving his arms and yelling at the dogs. "Get out of here! Go on, get!" The dogs, startled by the sudden intrusion, momentarily backed off, their growls turning into confused whimpers. They were strays, used to preying on the weak and vulnerable, not accustomed to facing a challenge. Daniel kept advancing, his voice loud and commanding, his body positioned between the dogs and the cats. He sprayed a short burst of pepper spray in the air, the pungent mist adding another layer of deterrent. The dogs, their eyes watering, their noses twitching, finally broke and ran, disappearing into the darkness of the alley. Daniel stood there for a moment, his heart still pounding, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He slowly turned his attention to the cats. The orange cat was in bad shape. Its fur was matted with blood and dirt, its body covered in scratches and bite marks. One of its ears was torn, and its leg was bent at an unnatural angle. It was breathing heavily, its eyes half closed, its body trembling with pain and exhaustion. The kitten, seemingly unharmed, emerged from its hiding place, cautiously approaching the larger cat. It nudged the orange cat's face with its tiny head, letting out a soft, plaintive meow. Daniel knelt down, his movements slow and gentle, not wanting to frighten them further. He spoke in a soothing voice. "It's okay, little ones. You're safe now. I'm not going to hurt you." The orange cat looked at him, its eyes filled with a mixture of pain, exhaustion, and was it gratitude? Daniel couldn't be sure, but he felt a connection to this creature, a sense of shared vulnerability, a silent understanding. He knew he couldn't leave them there. They needed help, immediate medical attention. He carefully scooped up the orange cat, cradling it gently in his arms. The cat didn't resist, didn't struggle, as if sensing that Daniel was trying to help. The kitten, hesitant at first, followed close behind, staying near Daniel's feet. He walked slowly, carefully, out of the alley and towards his home, his mind racing, his heart filled with a mix of emotions, fear, concern, and a growing sense of responsibility for these two fragile lives. Daniel's bungalow was small and sparsely furnished, a reflection of his solitary life. The furniture was old but sturdy, the walls adorned with a few faded photographs of Martha and himself, reminders of happier times. The house was usually quiet, filled only with the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Tonight, however, the silence was broken by the soft whimpers of the injured cat and the tiny meows of the kitten. Daniel placed the orange cat gently on an old blanket he'd spread on the living room floor. He examined the cat's wounds, his stomach churning at the sight of the torn flesh and the exposed bone. He knew he wasn't a veterinarian, but he had to do something. He found a first aid kit, a relic from Martha's time, and carefully cleaned the cat's wounds with antiseptic wipes. The cat flinched and hissed in pain, but it didn't try to bite or scratch. Daniel spoke to it in a soothing voice, trying to reassure it, to let it know that he was trying to help. He wrapped the cat's injured leg with a clean bandage, improvising a splint with a couple of pencils and some tape. It wasn't perfect, but it would have to do until he could get the cat to a veterinarian. The kitten, meanwhile, seemed to be unharmed, but it was clearly traumatized. It huddled close to the larger cat, seeking comfort and warmth. Daniel offered it some milk in a saucer, which it lapped up eagerly. He found an old cardboard box and lined it with soft towels, creating a makeshift bed for the cats. He placed the box near the fireplace, hoping to keep them warm. He looked at the two cats, the injured orange warrior and the tiny frightened kitten, and felt a surge of emotion he hadn't experienced in years. He felt a sense of purpose, a sense of responsibility, a sense of connection. He had been alone for so long, lost in his grief and his routine, that he'd forgotten what it felt like to care for another living being. He knew he couldn't keep them. He wasn't equipped to care for two cats, especially one with such serious injuries. But he couldn't abandon them either. He had to help them, to see them through this crisis, to give them a chance to survive. He decided to call the local veterinarian, Dr. Carter, even though it was late. He found her number in the phone book and dialed, his hand trembling slightly. Dr. Carter, surprisingly, answered on the third ring. Her voice was calm and reassuring even at this late hour. Daniel explained the situation, describing the cat's injuries and his makeshift efforts at first aid. Dr. Carter listened patiently, asking a few clarifying questions. She told him to keep the cats warm and comfortable, to offer them water, and to bring them to her clinic first thing in the morning. She warned him that the orange cat's injuries sounded serious, and that there was no guarantee it would survive. Daniel hung up the phone, feeling a mixture of relief and dread. He had done all he could for now, but the uncertainty of the situation weighed heavily on him. He sat beside the cardboard box, watching the cats. The orange cat was lying still, its breathing shallow and ragged. The kitten was curled up beside it, asleep. Daniel reached out and gently stroked the orange cat's fur, feeling the warmth of its body, the faint tremor that ran through it. He stayed up all night, watching over them, checking their breathing, offering them water, whispering words of comfort. He dozed fitfully in the armchair, his sleep punctuated by anxious dreams. He felt a growing attachment to these two creatures, a sense of protectiveness, a desire to see them safe and healthy. He thought about Martha, about how much she would have loved these cats, about how she would have known exactly what to do. He felt a pang of grief, a renewed sense of loss, but it was tempered by a strange sense of gratitude. These cats, in their vulnerability, had awakened something within him, had reminded him of the capacity for love and compassion that still resided within his heart. As the first rays of dawn filtered through the curtains, Daniel felt a glimmer of hope. The cats had survived the night. That was a start. He knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he was determined to see it through, to give these two creatures the best possible chance at a new life. He had found them in the darkness, and he wouldn't abandon them now. The morning sun, pale and weak, cast long shadows across the waiting room of Oak Haven Veterinary Clinic. Daniel sat nervously, the cardboard box containing Leo and Hope resting on his lap. The clinic was small, but clean and welcoming, filled with the comforting scent of antiseptic and the gentle murmur of animal sounds. Dr. Emily Carter, a woman in her late 30s with a kind smile and intelligent eyes, emerged from the back room. "Mr. Mallory?" she asked, her voice soft and reassuring. Daniel stood up, clutching the box. "Yes, that's me. These are the cats I spoke to you about last night." Dr. Carter led him into an examination room, her movements efficient and gentle. She carefully examined Leo first, her fingers probing his wounds, her eyes assessing his condition. The kitten, Hope, huddled in the corner of the box, watching with wide, anxious eyes. "He's in rough shape," Dr. Carter said, her voice grave. "Multiple lacerations, a fractured leg, and he's severely dehydrated. He's also lost a lot of blood." Daniel's heart sank. He'd known it was bad, but hearing the veterinarian confirm it made it all the more real. Will he make it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Carter looked at him, her expression compassionate. "We'll do everything we can, Mr. Mallory. He's a fighter, I can tell you that. He's lucky you found him when you did." She then turned her attention to Hope, examining her with the same gentle care. "This little one seems to be physically unharmed, just scared. She's probably about 6 weeks old, weaned, but still needs a lot of care." Dr. Carter outlined the treatment plan for Leo. He would need surgery to repair his leg, antibiotics to fight infection, and fluids to combat dehydration. It would be a long and difficult recovery, and there were no guarantees. Daniel listened, his mind reeling. He hadn't thought about the cost, the financial burden of caring for two cats, especially one with such extensive injuries. He was living on a fixed income, his savings dwindling. How much will all this cost?" he asked, his voice hesitant. Dr. Carter named a figure that made Daniel's stomach clench. It was more than he could afford, more than he had in his checking account. He was about to say something, to explain his situation, to ask if there were any other options, when Dr. Carter held up a hand. "Mr. Mallory," she said, her voice firm but kind, "don't worry about the cost right now. We'll figure something out. We have a fund for situations like this, donations from the community, and I'm willing to work with you on a payment plan. The important thing is to get Leo the care he needs." Daniel felt a wave of relief wash over him, a sense of gratitude so profound that it brought tears to his eyes. He looked at Dr. Carter, at her compassionate face, and felt a surge of hope. He had found kindness in an unexpected place, a lifeline in a sea of uncertainty. "Thank you," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you so much." "We'll take good care of him, Mr. Mallory," Dr. Carter said, smiling reassuringly, "and of little hope, too. You go home and get some rest. We'll call you as soon as we have any news." Daniel left the clinic feeling drained, but also strangely uplifted. He had done all he could, and now it was in the hands of Dr. Carter and her team. He trusted them. He had to. As he walked home, the morning sun felt warmer on his face. The bird song seemed a little brighter. He had a purpose now, a reason to hope, a reason to fight. He had two small lives depending on him, and he wouldn't let them down. The next few weeks were a blur of anxiety, hope, and gradual progress. Leo underwent surgery, a delicate procedure to repair his fractured leg. Dr. Carter called Daniel regularly, updating him on Leo's condition, reassuring him that he was responding well to treatment. Daniel visited the clinic every day, sitting with Leo, stroking his fur, talking to him in a soothing voice. He'd bring Hope along too, the kitten, now a playful ball of energy, exploring the clinic with boundless curiosity. Slowly, painstakingly, Leo began to heal. The infection subsided, the swelling in his leg went down, and he started to put weight on it, gingerly at first, then with growing confidence. He remained a quiet, stoic cat, but he'd purr softly when Daniel stroked him, his amber eyes reflecting a deep sense of gratitude. Daniel, meanwhile, was adapting to his new life as a cat owner. He bought cat food, litter, toys, and a scratching post. He learned how to administer Leo's medication, how to change his bandages, how to care for a cat with special needs. He also started to clean up his house to make it more welcoming for his new companions. He vacuumed, he dusted, he even tackled the overgrown flower beds, Martha's roses responding to his care with a burst of late-season blooms. His routine, once marked by solitude and monotony, was now filled with purpose and activity. He woke early, eager to check on the cats, to feed them, to play with them. He spent hours watching them, marveling at their resilience, their grace, their innate ability to find joy in the simplest of things. He found himself talking to them, sharing his thoughts, his memories, his hopes and fears. He'd tell them about Martha, about his life before blindness, about the dreams he'd once had. He'd talk about the factory, about the town, about the changes he'd seen. And the cats, in their own silent way, seemed to listen, offering him a comfort and companionship he hadn't realized he craved. His neighbors, initially curious about the sudden appearance of two cats in his life, began to offer their support. They'd bring him cat food, offer to help with errands, and simply stop by to chat, to check on him and the cats. He was no longer the reclusive old man of Maple Street. He was Daniel, the kind man who had rescued two cats from a terrible fate. His life was changing, slowly but surely, transforming from a landscape of gray into a world filled with color, with warmth, with love. And it was all thanks to a battered, injured orange cat and a tiny, frightened kitten. After several weeks of recovery at the clinic and then at home, Leo seemed almost back to his old self. though he walked with a slight limp, a permanent reminder of his ordeal. He was still quiet, reserved, but he'd developed a deep affection for Daniel, following him around the house, rubbing against his legs, purring contentedly when petted. Hope, now a rambunctious kitten, was a constant source of amusement, chasing after toys, climbing curtains, and generally wreaking havoc in her playful way. One evening, as Daniel was preparing dinner, he realized that Leo was nowhere to be found. He searched the house, calling his name, but there was no sign of the orange cat. He checked the windows, the doors, all were closed. He began to panic. He rushed outside, searching the yard, the garden, the shed. He called Leo's name again and again, his voice rising in desperation. He couldn't understand how the cat could have gotten out. He'd been so careful, so vigilant. He remembered the alleyway, the dogs, the injuries. He felt a surge of fear, imagining Leo out there, alone, vulnerable, facing danger once again. He walked around the block, calling Leo's name, his cane tapping out a frantic rhythm on the sidewalk. He asked his neighbors if they'd seen him, but no one had. As darkness fell, Daniel's despair grew. He returned home, defeated, his heart heavy with grief. He couldn't bear the thought of losing Leo, not after all they'd been through. He sat in his armchair, staring into the darkness, his mind racing. He blamed himself. He should have been more careful. He should have known better. Then he heard a faint sound, a scratching at the back door. He rushed to the door, his heart pounding with hope. He opened it, and there, standing on the porch, was Leo, looking slightly sheepish, with a small dead mouse clutched in his jaws. Daniel was overjoyed to see Leo safe, but he was also puzzled. How had the cat gotten out, and where had he been? The mouse was a clue, a sign that Leo had been hunting, venturing beyond the confines of the house and yard. The next evening, Daniel decided to be more vigilant. He kept a close eye on Leo, watching his every move. As darkness fell, Leo became restless, pacing back and forth, scratching at the back door. Daniel pretended to ignore him, watching from the corner of his eye. He saw Leo, with a surprising agility, jump onto the kitchen counter, then onto the top of the refrigerator, and then, with a graceful leap, squeeze through a small opening in the window screen, a gap Daniel hadn't even noticed. Daniel, amazed and slightly amused, decided to follow him. He waited a few minutes, then slipped out the back door, his cane in hand, his senses on high alert. He followed Leo at a distance, staying in the shadows, keeping his footsteps quiet. Leo, seemingly unaware that he was being followed, moved with a purpose, his body low to the ground, his tail twitching. He led Daniel through the backyards of several houses, then across a small field, and finally to the edge of town, to the old abandoned garbage dump. Daniel watched in disbelief as Leo approached a pile of discarded tires, meowing softly. From the shadows, several cats emerged, their eyes glowing in the darkness. They were thin, scrawny, their fur matted and dirty. They were clearly strays, forgotten felines, eking out a miserable existence on the fringes of society. Leo dropped the mouse he'd been carrying, and the other cats eagerly devoured it. Then Leo began to groom himself, meticulously cleaning his fur, as if preparing for a special occasion. Daniel realized, with a growing sense of awe and admiration, what Leo was doing. He was sharing his food, his meager bounty, with these other cats, these forgotten creatures. He was, despite his own injuries, his own struggles, taking care of them, providing for them, acting as their protector. Daniel watched the scene unfold, his heart filled with a mix of emotions: admiration for Leo's selflessness, sadness for the plight of the other cats, and a growing sense of responsibility. He couldn't just stand by and watch these animals suffer. He had to do something. He returned home, his mind racing. He knew he couldn't take in all those cats. He barely had enough resources to care for Leo and Hope. But he couldn't ignore their suffering either. He started small. The next day, he bought several large bags of dry cat food and a few cans of wet food. He returned to the garbage dump, cautiously approaching the cats, speaking to them in a soothing voice. They were wary at first, hissing and spitting, but Leo, recognizing Daniel, approached him, rubbing against his legs, purring. The other cats, seeing Leo's trust in Daniel, slowly began to relax, to approach him tentatively. He poured the food onto a clean piece of cardboard, and the cats devoured it ravenously. He watched them eat, feeling a sense of satisfaction, a sense of purpose. He had made a difference, a small difference, but a difference nonetheless. He continued to visit the garbage dump every evening, bringing food for the cats, spending time with them, earning their trust. He learned their individual personalities, their quirks, their fears. He saw the toll that their hard lives had taken on them, the scars, the injuries, the illnesses. He also realized the enormity of the problem. There were more cats than he'd initially thought, perhaps 20 or 30, all struggling to survive. He knew that his efforts were just a temporary solution, a band-aid on a gaping wound. He needed to find a more sustainable way to help them. He grappled with the weight of responsibility, the feeling of being overwhelmed by the scale of the problem. He was just one man, with limited resources, limited experience. What could he possibly do to make a real difference? Daniel, feeling the need for guidance and support, decided to confide in Dr. Carter. He visited her at the clinic, sharing the story of Leo's nightly excursions and the plight of the stray cats at the garbage dump. Dr. Carter listened intently, her expression a mix of concern and admiration. She'd known there were stray cats in Oak Haven, but she hadn't realized the extent of the problem. She praised Daniel for his compassion and his efforts, but she also cautioned him about the risks involved, the potential for disease, the challenges of caring for so many animals. "It's a difficult situation, Mr. Mallory," she said, "but you're not alone. There are people in this town who care, who would be willing to help. The key is to raise awareness, to get the community involved." She suggested that he contact the local animal shelter, a small underfunded organization that struggled to cope with the existing animal population. She also suggested that he talk to his neighbors, his friends, anyone who might be willing to lend a hand. Daniel also confided in Sarah Miller, his neighbor and growing friend. Sarah, as always, was supportive and encouraging. She offered to help him in any way she could, volunteering to provide food, to help with transportation, to spread the word among her network of friends. He was hesitant to go public with the story, fearing that the authorities might simply round up the cats and euthanize them. He'd heard horror stories about overcrowded shelters, about animals being put down simply because there was no one to care for them. But Dr. Carter and Sarah convinced him that the risk was worth taking. They argued that the community needed to know, that people needed to be confronted with the reality of the situation. They believed that deep down, people were kind, compassionate, and willing to help, if only they were given the opportunity. So Daniel, with a mixture of trepidation and determination, decided to share his story, to let the world know about Leo and the forgotten felines of Oak Haven. He just wasn't sure how. The answer came in an unexpected way. Sarah's grandson, Tom, now a tech-savvy teenager, was visiting for the weekend. He'd heard the story of Leo and the stray cats, and he was fascinated. He asked Daniel if he could accompany him on one of his nightly visits to the garbage dump. Daniel, initially reluctant, eventually agreed. He figured it wouldn't hurt to have an extra pair of hands, and he knew that Tom was a good kid, responsible and compassionate. That evening, as Daniel was distributing the food, Tom, using his smartphone, secretly filmed Leo interacting with the other cats, sharing his meal, grooming them, protecting them. He captured the scene with a sensitivity and artistry that surprised Daniel. The next morning, Tom showed Daniel the video. It was a short, simple clip, but it was powerful. It captured the essence of Leo's selflessness, the desperation of the other cats, the quiet dignity of their struggle. "I want to post this online, Mr. Mallory," Tom said. "I think it could help. I think people need to see this." Daniel was hesitant. He was still worried about the potential consequences, about the authorities, about the negative attention, but he also saw the potential for good, the possibility of reaching a wider audience, of generating support for the cats. He gave Tom his permission, with one condition, that he not reveal the exact location of the garbage dump, to protect the cats from any potential harm. Tom posted the video on social media using the hashtag Leo the Lionheart and Yost Oak Haven Cats. He didn't expect much to come of it. He thought it might get a few likes, a few shares, maybe a few comments. He was wrong. The video went viral. Within hours, it had been viewed thousands of times, shared across multiple platforms, commented on by people from all over the world. Leo's story, his silent act of sacrifice, his unwavering loyalty to his fellow felines, touched a nerve, resonating with people's innate sense of compassion and empathy. The comments poured in, a flood of heartfelt messages expressing admiration for Leo, outrage at the plight of the stray cats, and a desire to help. People wanted to know how they could donate, how they could volunteer, how they could make a difference. The local news picked up the story, then the regional news, then the national news. Leo became an overnight sensation, a symbol of hope, resilience, and the enduring power of animal companionship. The town of Oak Haven, once known for its decline and its struggles, was now in the national spotlight, not for its problems, but for its compassion, for its willingness to rally around a cause, to help those in need. The town council held an emergency meeting addressing the issue of the stray cats for the first time in years. The local animal shelter, overwhelmed by the sudden influx of donations and offers of support, announced plans to expand its facilities. But the most significant change came from the community itself. People who had never met, who had lived in Oak Haven for years without ever interacting, came together, united by a common purpose, to help Leo and his forgotten felines. The movement to build a proper shelter for the stray cats gained momentum rapidly. A local farmer, moved by Leo's story, donated a piece of land on the outskirts of town. A construction company, owned by a former Oak Haven resident who had seen the viral video, offered to provide materials and labor at cost. Volunteers from all walks of life, carpenters, electricians, plumbers, painters, landscapers, came forward offering their skills and their time. Fundraisers were organized. Bake sales, car washes, charity auctions, raising thousands of dollars for the project. Daniel, initially overwhelmed by the scale of the undertaking, found himself at the center of it all, a reluctant leader, a figurehead for a movement that had taken on a life of its own. He worked tirelessly, coordinating volunteers, soliciting donations, overseeing the construction, his heart filled with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Dr. Carter provided veterinary care for the cats, ensuring they were vaccinated, spayed, or neutered, and treated for any illnesses or injuries. She also helped to design the shelter, ensuring it was safe, comfortable, and conducive to the cats' well-being. Sarah Miller, with her organizational skills and her network of contacts, became the project's unofficial manager, keeping track of donations, scheduling volunteers, and ensuring that everything ran smoothly. The shelter, named Leo's Haven, was designed not just as a temporary refuge, but as a permanent home for the cats. It included spacious indoor and outdoor enclosures, comfortable sleeping areas, plenty of toys and scratching posts, and a dedicated medical room. The construction took several months, but the community's enthusiasm never wavered. People worked tirelessly, driven by a shared sense of purpose, a desire to make a difference, to create a better world for these forgotten creatures. Finally, the day arrived when Leo's Haven was officially opened. The entire town turned out for the celebration, a joyous occasion filled with music, food, and speeches. Daniel, standing on a makeshift stage with Leo resting comfortably in his arms, addressed the crowd, his voice filled with emotion. "I never imagined," he said, "that a simple act of kindness, rescuing a cat from an alleyway, could lead to all of this. This shelter, this community effort, is a testament to the power of compassion, the power of connection, the power of hope. Leo, this little orange cat, he taught me that. He reminded me that even in the darkest of times, there is always light to be found, there is always love to be shared." The crowd cheered, their applause echoing through the crisp autumn air. Leo, seemingly understanding the significance of the moment, let out a soft, proud meow. Leo's Haven became a model for other communities, a shining example of how a grassroots effort could transform the lives of animals in need. It became a place of refuge, of healing, of hope. The cats, once forgotten and neglected, thrived in their new environment. They received regular veterinary care, plenty of food, and most importantly, love and attention from the volunteers who cared for them. A small statue of Leo, crafted by a local artist, was erected at the entrance to the shelter, a permanent tribute to the cat who had started it all, a symbol of courage, selflessness, and the enduring power of animal companionship. Daniel continued to be involved with the shelter, visiting regularly, helping with the chores, spending time with the cats. He was no longer the lonely, isolated man he had once been. He was part of a community, a family, a movement. Years passed. Daniel, now well into his 80s, remained a fixture at Leo's haven. He'd often sit in the sun-drenched common area, watching the cats play, interacting with the volunteers, sharing stories about Leo, who had passed away peacefully in his sleep a few years after the shelter opened. He'd reflect on the extraordinary journey that had begun in that dark alleyway, the journey that had transformed his life, the lives of so many animals, and the entire community of Oak Haven. He'd marvel at the power of a single act of kindness, the ripple effect that had spread outwards, touching so many lives. He'd found a new purpose, a new meaning in his later years. He'd discovered a strength he didn't know he possessed, a capacity for love and compassion that had been dormant for too long. He'd also found a deeper connection with his community, with the people he'd lived alongside for so many years without truly knowing. He'd formed lasting friendships with Sarah, with Dr. Carter, with the countless volunteers who dedicated their time and energy to Leo's haven. He'd even reconnected with his daughter Carol, their relationship strengthened by their shared love for animals and their commitment to the shelter. Carol and her children would visit often, helping out at the shelter, spending time with Daniel, and forging a bond that had been missing for far too long. Oak Haven, too, had been transformed. The town, once struggling with decline and despair, had found a renewed sense of purpose, a renewed sense of community. The shelter had become a source of pride, a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of collective action. The story of Leo, the little orange cat who had saved a kitten and inspired a town, became a local legend, passed down through generations. He was remembered not just for his bravery, but for his selflessness, his unwavering loyalty, his ability to bring people together. Daniel often thought about the darkness he'd experienced before finding Leo, the loneliness, the despair, the feeling that his life was over. He realized that Leo hadn't just saved him from that darkness, he'd shown him that there was still light to be found, that there was still love to be shared, that there was still purpose to be discovered. He knew that his time was limited, that he wouldn't live forever, but he wasn't afraid. He had lived a full life, a life filled with both joy and sorrow, a life that had taught him the most important lessons of all, the power of compassion, the importance of connection, and the enduring legacy of love. One crisp autumn evening, as he sat in his armchair, a soft blanket draped over his legs, a new generation of kittens playing at his feet, descendants, perhaps, of those Leo had protected, Daniel felt a profound sense of peace. He had made a difference. He had left the world a little better than he had found it, and that, he realized, was all that truly mattered. He smiled, a gentle, contented smile, and closed his eyes, ready to join Leo, Martha, and all those he had loved and lost in the quiet embrace of eternity. The legacy of the orange cat and the man who had found him would live on, a beacon of hope in a world that often felt too dark.
The old woman didn't speak for months, until the orange cat jumped into her lap and she whispered his name. Meadowbrook Senior Living, nestled in the rolling green hills of Vermont, was more than just a nursing home. It was a community. The building itself, a sprawling, single-story structure with large windows and inviting porches, was designed to feel like a home, not an institution. The air was filled with the scent of freshly baked bread and blooming flowers, and the sounds of laughter and conversation often echoed through the hallways. But in room 212, silence reigned. Agnes Peterson, 89 years old, sat in her armchair by the window, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains. Her hands, gnarled with age and arthritis, lay limp in her lap. Her face, once vibrant and full of life, was now etched with the deep lines of time and loss. Her eyes clouded with the fog of dementia. She hadn't spoken a word in months. Not to the nurses, not to the other residents, not even to her daughter, who visited dutifully every Sunday. She existed in a world of her own, a silent observer of a life that seemed to be fading away like an old photograph. The staff at Meadowbrook had tried everything to reach her. They'd played her favorite music, shown her old photographs, even tried sensory stimulation with different textures and scents. But nothing seemed to penetrate the wall of silence that surrounded her. Sarah Matthews, a compassionate nurse in her late 30s, refused to give up on Agnes. Sarah had a special way with the residents, a gentle touch and a patient ear that often coaxed them out of their shells. She'd spent countless hours sitting with Agnes, talking to her softly, reading aloud from her favorite books, even just holding her hand. "She's in there somewhere," Sarah would tell her colleagues. "I can feel it. We just need to find the key." Agnes's room was filled with reminders of her past. Faded photographs of a handsome young man in uniform, a smiling woman with bright eyes and a mischievous grin, a younger Agnes, and a playful orange cat. A worn, stuffed rabbit sat on her bedside table, its fur matted from years of being held close. A small, silver locket, engraved with the initials AP plus TM, lay on her dresser, untouched. One afternoon, as Sarah was adjusting Agnes's blanket, she noticed a flicker of movement in Agnes's eyes. She was staring at the photograph of the orange cat, a faint glimmer of recognition in her gaze. "Bong," Agnes whispered, her voice barely audible, a mere breath of sound. Sarah's heart leaped with hope. It was the first word Agnes had spoken in months, a key, perhaps, to unlocking the silent world within. Leo was no ordinary cat. He was a ginger tabby, a vibrant swirl of orange and white, with eyes the color of warm honey. He was playful and energetic, as most cats are. But he also possessed an uncanny ability to sense emotions, to offer comfort and companionship to those who needed it most. He belonged to Sarah, the nurse from Meadowbrook. They had found each other at a local animal shelter 2 years earlier, and their bond was immediate and profound. Leo had a way of calming Sarah's anxieties, of making her smile even on the toughest days. Sarah lived in a small cottage a few miles from Meadowbrook, and Leo was her constant companion. He'd greet her at the door when she came home from work, curl up on her lap while she read, and sleep at the foot of her bed, his purr a soothing lullaby. Sarah had noticed Leo's remarkable empathy early on. He seemed to know when she was feeling down, when she needed a furry friend to lean on. He'd rub against her legs, purr loudly, and gaze at her with his soulful eyes, as if to say, "I'm here for you." Because of this special quality, Sarah had started bringing Leo to Meadowbrook occasionally. The nursing home had a pet-friendly policy, and the residents adored him. He'd stroll through the common areas, accepting pats and scratches, charming everyone with his playful antics and his gentle demeanor. He seemed to have a knack for finding the residents who were feeling lonely or sad, offering them a warm, furry presence that eased their anxieties. One evening, after a particularly stressful shift, Sarah found herself overwhelmed with exhaustion and worry. A new resident was struggling to adjust, and a beloved long-term resident had taken a turn for the worse. Sarah felt the weight of her responsibilities, the emotional toll of caring for others. As she sat on her couch, feeling the tears welling up, Leo jumped onto her lap, nuzzling her face and purring loudly. He seemed to sense her distress, offering his silent, unwavering support. An idea sparked in Sarah's mind. Maybe, just maybe, Leo could help. Maybe he could bring a bit of joy and comfort to the residents, and perhaps even help her cope with the emotional demands of her job. "What do you think, Leo?" she whispered, stroking his soft fur. "Want to come to work with me tomorrow?" Leo blinked his golden eyes as if to say, "Of course. Where else would I be?" The next morning, Sarah arrived at Meadowbrook with Leo tucked safely inside his carrier. The residents, accustomed to his occasional visits, greeted him with smiles and delighted exclamations. Leo, ever the charmer, strutted through the common room, accepting pats and scratches, basking in the attention. Sarah watched him, a smile playing on her lips. He had a way of lifting spirits, of bringing a sense of lightness and joy to the often somber atmosphere of the nursing home. As Leo made his rounds, he seemed to be drawn by an unseen force towards a particular hallway. He paused at the entrance, his tail twitching, his ears perked up. It was the hallway that led to room 212, Agnes's room. Sarah hesitated. She'd never taken Leo to visit Agnes. Agnes was so withdrawn, so unresponsive, that Sarah feared the cat might frighten her or, worse, be met with indifference. But Leo seemed determined. He started down the hallway, his steps purposeful, his gaze fixed on the closed door at the end. Sarah, trusting his instincts, followed closely behind. She gently knocked on the door of room 212, then slowly opened it. Agnes was sitting in her usual chair by the window, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains, her expression blank and unseeing. "Agnes," Sarah said softly, "I have a visitor for you." Agnes didn't respond, didn't even turn her head. Leo, ignoring Sarah's hesitation, slipped past her and entered the room. He walked directly towards Agnes, his movements slow and deliberate. He paused at the foot of her chair, looking up at her with his golden eyes. Then, with a graceful leap, he jumped onto her lap. Sarah held her breath, watching anxiously. She expected Agnes to flinch, to push the cat away, to show some sign of fear or annoyance. But Agnes did none of those things. Instead, she slowly lowered her hands, her fingers trembling slightly, and placed them on Leo's soft, orange fur. Her eyes, usually clouded with confusion, widened slightly, a flicker of recognition sparking within them. She looked down at the cat, her lips moving silently for a moment. Then, in a voice so soft it was barely a whisper, she spoke. "Bong," she murmured. Are you back?" Sarah stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Agnes, who hadn't spoken a word in months, had just spoken, and she'd called Leo by a name that was clearly not his own. It was a moment of profound mystery, of unexpected connection, a moment that would change everything. Sarah stood in the doorway of room 212, her mind reeling. Agnes, the silent resident, had spoken, and she had called Leo, Sarah's beloved cat, Bong. "Agnes," Sarah said gently, stepping closer to the chair. "That's Leo. He's my cat." Agnes didn't seem to hear her. She was completely focused on Leo, her hands gently stroking his fur, her eyes filled with a mixture of wonder and disbelief. "Bong," she repeated, her voice a little stronger this time. You came back." Leo, as if understanding her words, purred loudly and nuzzled his head against her hand. He seemed to be playing along, accepting the role of this mysterious Bong. Sarah, realizing that something extraordinary was happening, decided to go with it. She knelt down beside Agnes's chair, her voice calm and reassuring. "He's a very friendly cat, Agnes," she said. "He likes to be petted." Agnes continued to stroke Leo, her touch becoming more confident, more familiar. A faint smile touched her lips, the first genuine smile Sarah had seen on her face in months. You were so small," Agnes whispered, her gaze fixed on Leo. A little orange ball of fluff. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Agnes was talking about the past, about a time when her cat, Bong, was a kitten. She was remembering. "Tell me about him, Agnes," Sarah said softly, encouraging her to continue. Agnes, lost in her memories, began to speak, hesitantly at first, then with increasing fluency. Her voice was raspy and weak, but her words were clear, her sentences coherent. He followed me home from school," she said, her eyes misting over. "He was hiding under a bush, all alone." She paused, stroking Leo's fur, her fingers tracing the familiar patterns of his coat. I couldn't leave him," she continued. "He was so tiny, so scared." Sarah listened intently, her mind racing. She realized that Agnes was recounting the story of how she'd found Bong, her childhood cat. The memories, long buried beneath the fog of dementia, were surfacing, triggered by the presence of Leo. Sarah carefully pulled a small notepad and pen from her pocket and began to jot down everything Agnes said. She knew this was a precious moment, a breakthrough that could be crucial to Agnes's well-being. As Agnes continued to talk, fragments of her past began to emerge, like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle slowly coming together. She spoke of a farm, of fields of golden wheat, of a big red barn, and of a playful orange cat who followed her everywhere. The cat listened to every word. The following days at Meadowbrook were unlike any Sarah had ever experienced. With Leo as her constant companion, Agnes continued to talk, her memories unfolding like a long-forgotten tapestry. The silent resident of room 212 had found her voice, and the stories she told were captivating, filled with the joys and sorrows of a life well lived. Agnes spoke of her childhood on a small farm in rural Ohio during the Great Depression. She described a life of simple pleasures and hard work, of close-knit family ties and a deep connection to the land. She remembered the endless fields of corn and wheat, the scent of freshly baked bread wafting from the kitchen, and the comforting presence of her family gathered around the fireplace on cold winter nights. And always there was Bong. He was woven into the fabric of her childhood memories, a constant companion, a furry friend who shared her adventures and offered unconditional love. She described him as a playful, mischievous kitten who grew into a loyal and affectionate cat. He'd follow her to school, wait for her at the bus stop, curl up on her bed at night and purr her to sleep. As Agnes grew older, her life changed. She fell in love with a young man named Thomas, a handsome soldier with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She showed Sarah the faded photograph of him in his uniform, her eyes filled with a bittersweet mixture of love and loss. "He was the love of my life," she whispered, her voice trembling. She recounted their brief but passionate courtship, their hurried wedding before he was shipped off to fight in World War II. She described the agonizing wait for news, the constant fear that gnawed at her heart, and the crushing blow of receiving the telegram informing her of his death. "He never came home," she said, tears streaming down her face. "He was so young, so full of life." After Thomas's death, Agnes had found solace in Bong. He had been her only comfort during those dark days, a furry anchor in a sea of grief. He'd sensed her sadness, offering his silent, unwavering support. She spoke of moving to the city, of working as a secretary, of trying to build a new life for herself. But she'd never forgotten her first love, or the small town she called home. Nor has she forgotten Bong, the orange cat who had helped her through her darkest hours. Sarah listened to these stories, her heart filled with compassion and awe. She realized that Agnes wasn't just recounting memories. She was reliving them, finding solace and healing in the act of remembering. And Leo, the orange cat who had miraculously sparked this awakening, remained by her side, a silent, furry witness to her journey through time. He lay in her lap listening to her voice. Sarah, deeply moved by Agnes's stories and astonished by her progress, knew she had to share this remarkable development with the Meadowbrook staff and, most importantly, with Dr. Miller, Agnes's attending physician. She gathered her notes, the detailed accounts of Agnes's conversations, and approached Dr. Miller during his rounds. Dr. Miller, a seasoned physician in his late 50s, was known for his calm demeanor and his thorough, evidence-based approach to medicine. He had always been kind and compassionate towards Agnes, but he had also been realistic about her prognosis, acknowledging the limitations of treating advanced dementia. "Dr. Miller," Sarah began, her voice filled with a mixture of excitement and apprehension, "I need to show you something. It's about Agnes Peterson in room 212. Dr. Miller, intrigued by Sarah's tone, followed her to a quiet corner of the nurse's station. Sarah recounted everything. Leo's unexpected visit, Agnes's first words, the subsequent outpouring of memories, and the striking resemblance between Leo and Agnes's description of her childhood cat, Bong. Dr. Miller listened patiently, his brow furrowed in concentration. He reviewed Sarah's notes, his eyes scanning the detailed accounts of Agnes's conversations. He was initially skeptical, attributing the change to a temporary fluctuation in Agnes's condition, a common occurrence in dementia patients. "It's certainly unusual, Sarah," he said, his voice measured. "But dementia can be unpredictable. We often see periods of lucidity, followed by regression. I wouldn't get your hopes up too high." Sarah, however, was undeterred. "I know it sounds unbelievable, Dr. Miller," she said, "but you have to see her. You have to see the change in her. It's more than just a temporary improvement. It's like she's come back to life." Dr. Miller, intrigued by Sarah's conviction, agreed to examine Agnes. He entered room 212 with a cautious curiosity, expecting to find the same withdrawn, unresponsive patient he had seen countless times before. But what he found was vastly different. Agnes was sitting in her chair, Leo curled up on her lap, her fingers gently stroking his fur. She was talking, her voice soft but clear, her eyes filled with a light that had been absent for months. Dr. Miller approached her slowly, introducing himself and asking her a few simple questions. Agnes responded appropriately, answering his questions with surprising clarity and coherence. She even smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that transformed her face. He conducted a brief neurological examination, testing her reflexes, her cognitive function, and her memory. He was astonished by the results. Her cognitive scores had improved dramatically, showing a level of awareness and responsiveness that he had not thought possible. He looked at Leo, the orange cat who was purring contentedly on Agnes's lap, and then back at Agnes. He couldn't deny the evidence before his eyes. Something extraordinary was happening. "This is remarkable, Agnes," he said, his voice filled with genuine wonder. "Truly remarkable." He discussed the case with Sarah and later with other specialists, sharing the details of Agnes's sudden improvement and the potential role of the cat in triggering her recovery. The medical explanation remained somewhat ambiguous. While animal-assisted therapy was known to have positive effects on dementia patients, the extent of Agnes's improvement was unprecedented. "It's likely a combination of factors," Dr. Miller explained to Sarah. "The emotional connection with the cat, the triggering of positive memories, the reduction in stress and anxiety. It's all contributing to a remarkable neurological response. We may never fully understand it, but we can't deny the positive impact." The mystery of Agnes's transformation remained, but the results were undeniable. The silent resident of room 212 had found her voice, her memories, and a renewed connection to the world, all thanks to an unexpected visitor, an orange cat who had somehow unlocked the doors to her past. Michael, 78 years old, sat on the park bench, the emptiness beside him a stark reminder of the companion he had lost just a week ago. His wife, Eleanor, his partner of 55 years, had passed away peacefully in her sleep, leaving a void in his life that felt as vast as the sky above. He looked down at his hands, gnarled with age and etched with the memories of a life well lived. He and Eleanor had shared everything: laughter, tears, triumphs, and heartbreaks. They had built a life together, a home filled with love and warmth. And for the past 12 years, that home had also included the joyful presence of Goldie, their beloved golden retriever. Goldie had been more than just a pet. She was family, her boundless energy, her unwavering loyalty, and her goofy grin had brightened their days and filled their home with laughter. She had been Eleanor's shadow, following her everywhere, her tail wagging incessantly. Now both Eleanor and Goldie were gone. Goldie had succumbed to old age just a few days before Eleanor, as if she knew her job of comforting her human was done, and she needed to meet her at the Rainbow Bridge. The house felt eerily silent without the click of Goldie's nails on the hardwood floor, the soft thump of her tail against the furniture, the gentle sighs she'd make as she drifted off to sleep at the foot of their bed. Michael felt lost, adrift in a sea of grief, unsure how to navigate this new, lonely chapter of his life. He felt the tears in his eyes. He'd been coming to this park every day since Eleanor's passing, seeking solace in the familiar surroundings. They had often walked Goldie here, enjoying the fresh air and the sunshine. The memories were bittersweet, a reminder of the joy they had shared and the gaping hole that their absence had left. Michael closed his eyes and could see Goldie in his mind. The sun beat down on the cracked asphalt of the rest area, the air shimmering with heat. Mark, a young man with a mop of unruly brown hair and a determined glint in his eyes, leaned against his beat-up pickup truck, scanning the endless stream of cars and trucks whizzing by on the interstate. He was on a cross-country road trip, a journey of self-discovery, or so he'd told his friends and family. He was driving from his home in Connecticut to California, hoping to find a new beginning. He'd stopped at this rest area in rural Nebraska for a quick break, a chance to stretch his legs and grab a lukewarm soda from the vending machine. He hadn't expected to witness a crime. As he was walking back to his truck, he'd seen a man, rough-looking and agitated, struggling with a golden retriever. The dog was clearly distressed, whimpering and pulling against its leash, its tail tucked between its legs. The man was yanking on the leash, cursing under his breath, and forcefully shoving the dog into the back of a battered, dark green van. Something about the scene had struck Mark as deeply wrong. The dog's fear was palpable, the man's aggression unsettling. It didn't look like a typical owner-pet interaction. It looked like a kidnapping. Mark, a lifelong animal lover, had hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. He wasn't a hero, he wasn't looking for trouble, but he couldn't shake the image of the terrified dog. He'd quickly pulled out his phone and snapped a few blurry pictures of the van, managing to capture a partial license plate number, NB, followed by 3 digits he couldn't quite make out. He'd watched as the van sped away, disappearing onto the highway, leaving him with a knot of anxiety in his stomach and a growing sense of responsibility. He knew he had to do something. He couldn't just stand by and let that dog suffer. He had a gut feeling, a strong conviction that something terrible was happening, and he couldn't ignore it. He walked back to his truck, his mind racing. He had a description of the van, a partial license plate, and a burning desire to help that golden retriever. He wasn't sure what he could do, but he was determined to try. He sat in his truck, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the highway, a sense of purpose hardening his resolve. He would find that dog. Mark's first instinct was to call the police. He dialed 911, his hands slightly shaking as he recounted what he'd witnessed at the rest area. He described the man, the van, the distressed golden retriever, and the partial license plate number. The dispatcher on the other end of the line was polite but non-committal. She took down the information, but she also cautioned him that without a full license plate number or a more specific location, there wasn't much they could do. It could just be a disobedient dog, she suggested, her tone suggesting that Mark was overreacting. Mark felt a surge of frustration. He knew this was more than just a disobedient dog. He had seen the fear in the retriever's eyes, the man's aggressive behavior. He couldn't just give up. "Please," he pleaded, his voice tinged with desperation. "This dog was in trouble. I know it. Can't you at least put out an alert?" The dispatcher sighed. "We'll make a note of it, sir," she said. "But I can't promise anything." Mark hung up, feeling defeated but not deterred. He knew he had to do more. He couldn't rely on the police alone. He decided to use the power of social media. He crafted a post describing the incident in detail, including the description of the van, the partial license plate, and the location of the rest area. He added the blurry photos he'd taken, hoping someone might recognize the vehicle. "Please share," he wrote. golden retriever potentially kidnapped at rest area on I-80 in Nebraska. Please help me find this dog. He posted it on his Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter accounts, tagging local animal shelters and rescue groups. He felt a glimmer of hope as the post started to gain traction, with people sharing it and offering words of encouragement. He then spent the next few hours driving around the area, searching for the dark green van. He checked gas stations, truck stops, and motels, his eyes scanning every parking lot, every side street. He knew the odds were stacked against him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he had to try. He felt a growing sense of urgency, a fear that every minute wasted could be putting the dog in greater danger. He imagined the dog, scared and alone, and the thought spurred him on. He wouldn't give up. Not yet. As dusk began to settle, casting long shadows across the flat Nebraska landscape, Mark's hope began to dwindle. He'd been searching for hours, driving countless miles, with no sign of the dark green van or the golden retriever. He was exhausted, discouraged, and starting to doubt his ability to make a difference. He pulled into a small, dusty gas station on the outskirts of a rural town, his fuel gauge hovering near empty. He filled up his tank, his mind replaying the scene at the rest area, the dog's terrified eyes haunting him. As he was paying for the gas, he noticed a dirt road leading away from the highway, disappearing behind a cluster of dilapidated buildings. An old, faded sign read, "Jensen's Auto Salvage." Something about the road, about the secluded location, sparked a flicker of intuition. He decided to take a chance. He drove down the dirt road, his truck bouncing over the uneven surface. The road wound its way through a field of tall, dry grass, leading towards a collection of rusting cars, piles of scrap metal, and a large, corrugated metal warehouse. As he approached the warehouse, he heard it. A faint, mournful bark. His heart leaped with a mixture of hope and dread. He slowed his truck, his eyes scanning the area. And then he saw it. Behind the warehouse, partially hidden by a stack of old tires, was a small wire mesh cage. And inside the cage, huddled in a corner, was a golden retriever. It was the dog. Mark slammed on the brakes, his heart pounding in his chest. He jumped out of his truck, his legs feeling shaky with adrenaline. He cautiously approached the cage, his eyes fixed on the dog. The retriever, seeing him approach, lifted its head and let out a soft whimper. His tail gave a tentative wag. It was definitely the dog he'd seen at the rest area, its golden fur matted and dirty, its eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. Mark reached the cage, his hands trembling as he examined the latch. It was secured with a simple padlock, but he didn't have a key or any tools to break it. He looked around, desperate, his eyes scanning the yard for anything he could use. He saw a heavy crowbar leaning against the side of the warehouse. He grabbed it, his hands gripping the cold metal, his mind racing. He knew he was trespassing, that he was taking a risk, but he couldn't leave the dog there. He had to get it out. He looked around to see if anyone was there, and didn't notice any presence. He took out his phone, dialed 911, and started to hit the lock. As Mark was frantically trying to break the padlock with the crowbar, the sound of a gruff voice startled him. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" Mark turned to see a large, burly man, the same man he'd seen at the rest area, storming towards him, his face contorted with rage. He was wearing greasy overalls and a stained baseball cap, and his eyes were narrowed with suspicion and anger. I saw the dog," Mark stammered, his voice trembling slightly. He's in trouble." "That's my dog," the man snarled, his voice laced with menace. "Get away from him." "He's not your dog," Mark retorted, his voice gaining strength. "I saw you at the rest area. You were hurting him." The man lunged towards Mark, his hand reaching for the crowbar. "You saw nothing, kid," he growled. "Now get off my property before I call the cops." Just then, the sound of sirens pierced the air. The police, alerted by Mark's 911 call and guided by his description of the location, had arrived. 2 police cars screeched to a halt near the warehouse, their lights flashing, their sirens blaring. Two officers, a stern-faced woman and a younger, more hesitant man, jumped out of the cars, their hands resting on their holsters. "Police! Don't move!" the female officer shouted, her voice commanding. The man, realizing he was outnumbered and outmatched, froze, his anger giving way to a look of fear and resignation. He dropped the crowbar, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. The officers quickly apprehended the man, handcuffing him and reading him his rights. They then turned their attention to the golden retriever, who was cowering in the corner of the cage, whimpering softly. With the help of the crowbar, they managed to break the padlock and open the cage. The retriever, hesitant at first, slowly emerged, its tail tucked between its legs. It looked up at Mark, its eyes filled with gratitude. The female officer, noticing the dog's condition, knelt down and gently examined it. "He's scared, but he seems to be okay," she said. "We'll take him to the animal shelter, get him checked out." She turned to Mark, her expression softening. "You did a good thing, son," she said. "You saved this dog's life." Mark, his legs still shaking from the adrenaline rush, could only nod, his heart filled with a mixture of relief and satisfaction. He had done it. He had rescued the golden retriever. As the police were leading the man away, he glared at Mark, his eyes filled with hatred. "You'll regret this," he muttered. The officer escorting him tightened her grip on his arm. "You're under arrest for animal cruelty and potentially other charges," she said sternly. "We'll be investigating your operation here." It turned out that the man was running an illegal puppy mill, breeding and selling dogs under deplorable conditions. The golden retriever, along with several other dogs found on the property, were rescued and taken to the local animal shelter. The local news picked up the story, hailing Mark as a hero. His social media posts, which had initially gained modest traction, now went viral, with thousands of people sharing his story and praising his courage. Mark, however, remained humble, deflecting the praise and focusing on the well-being of the rescued dog. He visited the shelter the next day, bringing a bag of toys and treats. He sat with the golden retriever, stroking its soft fur, whispering words of comfort. He felt a deep connection to this dog, a bond forged in a moment of shared fear and a courageous act of rescue. He knew he couldn't leave him behind. He considered carefully, and he knew that he couldn't leave the dog. He decided to adopt it. News of the rescued golden retriever and Mark's heroic actions spread far and wide, reaching even the quiet corners of Meadowbrook Sr. living in Vermont. Sarah, catching up on the news during her lunch break, saw a report on a regional news channel. She was immediately struck by the dog's appearance. It bore a striking resemblance to a dog Agnes had been describing in her increasingly vivid stories, a dog named Major, who had belonged to her lost love, Thomas, during the war. Agnes, spurred by Leo's presence, had continued to share memories of her past. She'd spoken extensively about Thomas, their brief but intense romance, his deployment overseas, and the heartbreaking news of his death. She'd also mentioned his dog, Major, a loyal and affectionate golden retriever who had been a constant companion to Thomas's family while he was away. "He was such a good dog," Agnes had said, her voice filled with a wistful longing. He waited for Thomas, just like MIT waited for me." Sarah, initially skeptical, had begun to wonder if there might be a connection. The timeline seemed to fit. Thomas had died in World War II over 70 years ago. The rescued golden retriever was clearly a mature dog, but it was possible, even probable, that it was a descendant of Major. Driven by a growing sense of conviction, Sarah decided to investigate. She contacted the animal shelter in Nebraska where the dog was being cared for, explaining her situation and asking for more information. She learned that the dog had no microchip or collar, but the shelter staff confirmed its gentle nature and estimated its age to be around 7 or 8 years old. Sarah arranged for a video call with the shelter. When the golden retriever appeared on the screen, Sarah gasped. It was almost identical to the dog in the faded photographs Agnes had shown her, the dog that had belonged to Thomas. she decided to take a chance. She arranged for a few days off from work, packed a bag, and with Leo in tow, she couldn't leave him behind. She drove to the shelter in Nebraska with Agnes. The journey was long, but Agnes, surprisingly, seemed energized by the prospect of seeing the dog. She talked excitedly about Thomas and Major, her memories sharper and more detailed than ever before. When they finally arrived at the shelter, Sarah was filled with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. She led Agnes, her hand resting reassuringly on her arm, into the visiting room. The shelter staff brought in the golden retriever. He was hesitant at first, his tail tucked between his legs, his eyes wary. But as he saw Agnes, something shifted. He stopped, his head cocked, his ears perked up. He sniffed the air, his tail beginning to wag tentatively. Agnes, her eyes fixed on the dog, whispered a single word, "Major!" The golden retriever, as if responding to a long-forgotten command, let out a joyful bark and rushed towards her. He licked her face, nuzzled her hands, and wagged his tail with such force that his entire body wiggled. Agnes, tears streaming down her face, wrapped her arms around the dog, burying her face in his soft fur. "Oh, Major," she sobbed. You came back too." The shelter staff, witnessing the scene, were speechless. Sarah, her own eyes filled with tears, knew that she had witnessed something truly extraordinary. Further investigation, including a DNA test facilitated by a local veterinarian and a of historical records, confirmed the incredible truth. The rescued golden retriever was indeed a direct descendant of Thomas's dog, Major. The lineage had been preserved by Thomas's family, who had continued to breed golden retrievers, always naming one male in each litter Major in honor of their fallen son. The dog had ended up in the hands of the cruel man through a series of unfortunate circumstances, a twist of fate that had ultimately led him back to Agnes. The story concluded with Agnes and the golden retriever, whom she renamed Major, forming an unbreakable bond. They became inseparable, providing comfort and companionship to each other. Major's presence seemed to unlock even more of Agnes's memories, filling in the gaps in her story, bringing her a sense of peace and closure. Leo, too, remained a vital part of Agnes's life, his playful energy complementing Major's gentle calm. The two animals, the cat and the dog, became unlikely friends, sharing Agnes's affection and enriching her final years. The two animals, the cat that reminded her of her childhood, and the dog, the offspring of her lost love. The ending was a testament to the enduring power of love, the resilience of memory, and the extraordinary connections that can be forged between humans and animals, connections that can span generations and heal even the deepest wounds. It was a story of two reunions, two circles completed, a reminder that sometimes, even in the face of loss and heartbreak, hope can find a way to bloom again, as vibrant and unexpected as the wildflowers in a neglected garden. Meanwhile, in another place, Mark also feels very connected to the dog. He thought about it for 2 days and he knows he will adopt it. He decided to name him Courage.